The anime begins by showing us four individuals of immense power who have just finished giving a devastating training session to our protagonist, Rick Gladiatal, who is 32 years old. They are confident that he will find the level E exam easy in comparison, and they even worry that he might destroy the entire facility. Later, Rick visits the level E exam registration site, and when he introduces himself to the receptionist, she immediately recognizes him, reminding him that she is Elisa. Rick is happy to see her, as the last time they spoke was 2 years ago, noting that she had been transferred from Central. This is because Rick was working as a receptionist, and she was his colleague. However, Elisa comments that everyone was surprised when he suddenly quit. She is even more surprised to learn that he did so to become an adventurer, which is why he is here. Rick feels a bit embarrassed because becoming a 30-something adventurer is a bit ridiculous. People usually start at level F in their teens, and within a couple of years, they are at level E. Then, a drunken adventurer approaches to flirt with Elisa, but when he starts to cross the line, Rick steps in and pats his stomach. He tells Elisa that it's no problem, as he is used to this kind of situation, and when the adventurer passes out, he thinks the alcohol knocked him out. Now Elisa hands him his exam identification, and Rick sees that it's number 4242, realizing that it is pronounced die, making him worried as it's an unlucky number. Upon leaving the building, he meets Rionette Elfelt, someone accompanying him for the exam from the group that trained him. Rick can't help but fixate on her chest, trying to deny it when she mentions it. Meanwhile, inside the building, some adventurers are shocked to see a handprint on the drunken adventurer's armor, as his armor is made of steel. Talking about it, Elisa starts to think that Rick might have done it. Starting the exam, the instructor tells the participants to place their hands on a crystal in turns, which will measure their magical energy. Most readings are in the D and C ranges, but in Rick's case, it's a low F, the minimum possible, causing some of the guys to mock him. However, when they call the next person, the crystal suddenly fractures. Moving to the next room, the person in charge explains that they will measure the force of their punch with a green slime sack. It can absorb very powerful attacks, so they don't need to hold back. Seeing this, Rick recalls the training he endured, where his superior taught him that no matter what weapon or magic he uses, the key will be his own body. And if he can destroy this golden slime sack with his fists, he will know he can fully trust his body. Rick is quite worried about it being a golden one, as he doesn't know how to smash something as tough as a dragon's tooth with his fists. His superior tells him it's very basic for an adventurer, and if he asks, he can destroy 200 with one punch. Without further ado, he tells Rick that he will start with 50,000 punches a day, and remembering that, Rick thinks it was hell. One of the participants draws people's attention, who mention that he is the second son of a duke everyone talks about. And despite being only 11 years old, his magic is like that of a level C, making him a prodigy. This young boy begins reciting a fire spell, 3rd level elemental, Flame Eliminate, but when he fires it, only a small fireball comes out and hits the slime sack. The others recognize his power, while Rick is confused because one of his superiors used a similar spell effortlessly on a massive scale. So he concludes that this boy reduced the size of his attack for indoors, making him truly a genius. When it's Rick's turn, the person in charge, seeing his age, tells him that if he doesn't practice magic when young, he can't develop it as an adult, and his magic level test result was pathetic. For that reason, he recommends Rick to withdraw, as he doesn't think he will get far. After hearing this, Rick agrees that he's right, but also remembers part of the exhausting training he had. At this point, his fists were bloody, and he was exhausted, but his superior told him he still had 30,000 punches to go, asking if he wanted to give up. Rick responded no, standing up to continue. It's true that he starts quite late, but there's nothing wrong with that, no matter at what age you start pursuing your dreams. This gives him courage and motivation, beginning to gather a lot of strength in his fist to launch a powerful punch at the slime sack. His punch is so strong that it pulverizes it along with the back wall, and the impact's explosion dirties everything around with the slime's remains. While Rick thinks the sack was defective, the others are shocked by what they just witnessed. Meanwhile, the boy from before is annoyed that Rick stole his spotlight, but he doesn't care since his specialty is defensive magic, confident that he will be better than Rick. When they take this test, the boy is shocked to see Rick's tremendous defense, as even he couldn't protect himself from 4th level elemental magic. But Rick did it with ease. The student testing him admits it's impressive since Rick only used 1st level elemental air cushion to protect himself. And since he did it effortlessly, the boy informs Rick that he will level up and use 5th level elemental magic, advising him to use a more powerful defensive magic. But Rick says he can only use 1st level elemental magic for attack and defense. This surprises them, as he can only use that despite his incredible control over magic. Believing Rick is underestimating him, the boy proceeds with the higher-level attack. After firing this powerful attack, the others are shocked to see Rick block it without problems. This commotion catches the attention of Sylvester Elsernia, first-class knight of the kingdom. When he goes to the site to ask what's going on, he is informed that a level F adventurer destroyed a green slime sack with a single punch. Additionally, he was able to protect himself from a 5th-level elemental spell with a 1st-level elemental spell. He sees that it is number 4242, Rick Gladiatal, 32 years old, with 14 years as a receptionist at the Tiger Road Guild in the Cinquat headquarters. After finishing the written exam, Rick rests with Rionette, confident that he will score 100 on the exam he just took, all thanks to his office experience. He thinks he did well, although they gave him a low F in his magical capacity. She asks him not to worry, as he has improved a lot over the past 2 years. At that moment, the boy from before approaches, reminding Rick that his name is Fried Diremute. Rick thinks he is lost, so he offers to take him to his parents, but instead, Fried starts crying because Rick stole his spotlight. Seconds later, his sister appears, saying he has little shame, introducing herself as Angelica, the eldest daughter of the Diremute family. Fried tells her that this old man is bothering him, making Rick angry since he is 30. After a long argument about that, Angelica suddenly challenges him to a duel, throwing one of her gloves at him. Rick is surprised by her behavior, complaining about the cost of cleaning up such things. After that, he picks up the glove, and Rionette comments that picking up the glove means accepting the duel. Having no other choice, they head to a battlefield. And once there, Angelica tells him to prepare, as she, a second-class knight of the Kingdom Knights, will give him what he deserves. She explains that each participant demands something if they win, as they do in the Kingdom of Filheim. She demands that the loser serve the winner until death, confident that she will crush him as he deserves. Without a clue, Rick asks Rionette about her, and she explains that the Kingdom's Knights are the protectors of peace in the Kingdom of Filheim, and a second-class knight is like a level B adventurer. This scares Rick, as he knows that level B adventurers deal with strong monsters alone. Rionette asks him not to be hard on her, but he asks what she is saying, as he is level F and just started as an adventurer, believing he won't survive this. In response, Rionette asks him to remember his training from the past 2 years. When he does, he recalls such harsh and atrocious parts that make him vomit. But Rionette makes him see that at least he is no longer nervous. She also asks him to trust himself more, as the strongest group on the continent, Orichalcum Fist, considers him one of their own. This brings Rick back to his senses, and he puts on a better face, thanking her for her words, and finally preparing for the duel. Now Angelica tells him that since he is rank F, she will hold back a little to try not to kill him. Rick sees her enhancing her body and weapons, while she asks if he will be able to keep up with her speed, using the technique Swift Feet, allowing her to pass him by. Here she avoids hitting him on purpose, boasting that she was so fast he couldn't even see her attack, while Rick is left confused and somewhat distracted. Angelica warns him that this time she won't miss on purpose, and she attacks him seriously. But what Rick sees is that she is very slow, as from his point of view, it seems like she is moving in slow motion. Noting that she is slower than he is when running normally, and yet they call her lightning despite this. Rionette brings him back to his senses from his distraction, giving him the necessary time to dodge Angelica's attack easily. He takes this as having gotten lucky, so he attempts another attack on her. Rick thinks she is really strong, but the next thing that happens is that Angelica trips and starts spinning towards him at high speed. Unable to predict her movements, he dodges the multiple dangerous attacks as best he can, and then she crashes into the wall, embedding her sword in it. Convinced that the attack was dangerous, he considers himself a fool for believing she was strong, recognizing her great skill. On the other hand, Angelica is very embarrassed for tripping over that stone, but manages to disguise it by admiring that he was able to dodge her attack. Now she explains that she will move even faster, and that this level of Swift Feet exhausts her, and she can only use it 3 times. Starting her attack, she calls it Swift Feet to 1,000. But from Rick's perspective, he still sees her super slow, despite moving 3 times faster than before. After dodging her, she attacks once again without success, but on the 3rd attempt, she trips again, causing her to slide across the ground towards him. By this point, Rick is determined to counterattack, but due to her irregular movements on the ground, he narrowly misses his devastating punch. The impact he makes on the ground sends her flying, creating a large crater in the earth. This terrifies her, and when he approaches to declare that he won't hold back anymore, Angelica surrenders out of fear. Although she manages to disguise that fear, declaring that she will let him win today as a reward for dodging her. Before leaving, Rick reminds her of the initial promise, where the loser must serve the winner until death. But what Angelica does is ask her body for strength, managing to use Swift Feet to 1,000 to escape. At that moment, Rionette informs Rick that they are about to announce who passed the exam, and that his superiors will arrive soon as they want to see how he did. Learning this does not make Rick happy, as it gives him a bad feeling, seeing that the three of them are on their way there. Once in the room with the other applicants, Elisa informs everyone that those who pass the exam will participate in a simulated combat test tomorrow. While waiting for the results, Rionette encourages him to have more confidence, although she terrifies him by warning that if he fails, his training will be tripled. Fortunately, Rick sees that he has passed, and as he leaves, he smells a horrible odor. At that moment, a nobleman approaches, flirting with Rionette. He introduces himself as Raster Deermuet, the eldest son of the noble house of Deermuet, rulers of the North. However, Rick finds his name too long and prefers to call him Northerner. After learning Rionette's name, Raster continues to flirt with her, even taking her hand. Seeing this, Rick quickly intervenes, explaining that she is his girlfriend and that he won't let her be taken away right in front of his eyes. Raster looks at him with disdain, realizing that he's taking the exam, and insults him more than before. He boasts that he reached level E when he was just 14, but now he's level A and the examiner of the second test, proudly showing his rank identifier. With all these advantages, he asks Rionette to leave Rick and go with him, but Rionette clings to Rick's arm, rejecting his proposal and preferring to stay with Rick, while Rick, in turn, blushes as she presses her chest against him. Rionette also mentions that Raster's excessive cologne is unpleasant, and Rick realizes for the first time that the horrible smell is coming from Raster. Offended, Raster warns Rick to prepare himself because he will be his examiner for the second test, leaving quite angry. Once that matter is settled, Rick realizes how close he is to her and immediately steps back, apologizing for claiming she's his girlfriend without asking. But Rionette tells him she doesn't mind, as it made her very happy and saved her as well, giving a sweet smile that makes Rick a little embarrassed. Now we see Raster in his office complaining about Rick, as there are innate levels of hierarchy. Seconds later, his siblings arrive, crying to him. Freed tells him that a 40-year-old commoner humiliated him in the first test. Meanwhile, Angelica says that the same guy wanted to do all sorts of indecent things to her, taking advantage of a duel. Raster can't tolerate that someone made two Diremute nobles cry, but after thinking a bit, he realizes they are referring to Rick, so he asks if they remember his applicant number. They say it seemed like an unlucky number, making Raster smile maliciously. The next day, Rick is nervous as the simulated combat test approaches. Rionette asks him not to overdo it, but Rick questions why he would, worried that he might have to face the Northerner. At that moment, a man arrives, introducing himself as Lynx Larat, who will be his examiner for the second test. He will be in charge of supervising all those with numbers 4,200 or higher, and Rick celebrates this as he didn't get the Northerner, thanking his number 4,242. Lynx admits he's surprised that Rick decided to become an adventurer at 30 after being a receptionist, exclaiming enthusiastically that he has great determination. As a fellow middle-aged man, he feels inspired by Rick, wanting to be like him. Here, he tells Rick that he became an adventurer at 24, and if he's getting into this past 30, it must be because he feels a great passion. Rick agrees, saying it's his dream, though he asks how Lynx knows that. Lynx responds that it's evident because they are alike, and despite being 40, his dream is to reach level A, although it took him nearly 20 years to reach level B. Rick thinks that despite his age, he still keeps his passion alive, and for that reason, he extends his hand to declare it a pleasure to fight, and Lynx reciprocates. While they chat pleasantly, it's revealed that Raster is eavesdropping. When Lynx leaves, Raster surprises him, saying he's lucky that he wants to talk to him. While Rick is content in the waiting room, one of the supervisors arrives to announce something for those with numbers 4,200 or higher. It turns out that their examiner, Lynx Larat, has fallen ill, so the examiner from the previous group, Raster Deermuet, will replace him. Rick remains calm about this, but when Rionette reminds him that he's the man with the cologne from yesterday, he spits out his water in surprise, realizing she means the Northerner. When she thinks about the Diremute surname, she intuits that the ones from yesterday, Angelica and her brother, could be relatives of Raster. Here, Rick listens to the applicants talk about Raster, who is a noble that became level A at 17 and is known as the Man of 1,000 Skills. But the problem is his other nickname, the Destroyer of level F, and they say every year he crushes some applicant that catches his attention. Rick realizes that he caught his attention so much that he'll focus on him, becoming more nervous than before because of this. Meanwhile, Raster continues to humiliate the applicants he's examining, showing his magical superiority, and it's revealed that he's talking to one of his guards about something. Now Rick paces back and forth, thinking about what he can do about this, as the Man of 1,000 Skills, a level A, has him in his sights. In contrast, he's level F, and can barely use first-level elemental magic, wanting to go home, though the triple training would kill him, which is what awaits him if he fails. Seeing him like this, Rionette sits in front of him and asks if he doesn't trust his chances. Rick responds that he started late and everyone tells him the same thing, that he should retire. But Rionette asks if it were the other way around because if others' words can diminish his confidence, they could also increase it. She makes it clear that she believes in him, that he is very strong, and that he will pass this test and can beat the man with the cologne, and that he can do it since he decided to become an adventurer. Finally, she asks him if he trusts her, and with his expression and spirits lifted, he responds that he does, thanking her. He also mentions that hearing her say that makes him feel like he's regaining his confidence. Suddenly, a hooded stranger appears, constantly interrupting their words to correct them with the appropriate ones, though Rick doesn't notice. This stranger offers to read his future since he's about to go to the second test, and upon taking him to his table, he reveals that he is a fortune teller, assuring him that he's not suspicious. Rick trusts him without much more thought and sits in the chair to have his future read, but as he does, the chair's magic circle activates and teleports him. After that, the fortune teller laughs victoriously, removing his hood to reveal that he is freed. The next thing that happens is a huge explosion that destroys the wall behind him, as Rionette now has him in her grasp, demanding to know where he sent Rick. When Freed responds that he won't say, Rionette moves a finger, and a cutting wind instantly destroys his eyelids. Here she warns him that the next will be his eye, demanding again Rick's location, giving him the choice of which eye, left or right. This elevates Freed's nerves, who tells her that teleportation magic is very complex, so even for a genius like him, the limit is 100 meters, so Rick shouldn't be too far. Meanwhile, Rick sees that he's behind the examination area, on the edge of a river, not understanding how he ended up there. Seconds later, some armed individuals appear, and the butler from before tells him he will have to sleep for a while. They assure him that they're not mistaken, and that they're the personal guard of the Diremute, Rick recognizing that last name as belonging to those three siblings. They tell him that Lord Raster has nothing to worry about, and that he'll fail the exam without even participating. They also warn him that they are as strong as a level B, with some as strong as a level A, including the butler. Rick feels cornered, not agreeing to fail over something so unjust as this. Suddenly his three superiors appear, where one of them asks him what he's doing here, as he has an exam to take. One of the guards approaches the largest superior to act insolent, but upon seeing that he doesn't leave, he decides to attack him with his huge sword. His weapon is shattered when it impacts his head, while Rick's superior remains unfazed by it. Instead, he notes that the guard has significantly enhanced his physical strength, but forgot to reinforce his weapon, which is a shame. The big guy gets angry after hearing this and throws a punch, but the orc stops it with one hand, squeezing his fist so hard that it shatters. While the guard suffers from pain, the orc tells him not to worry, reciting a spell to completely heal his hand. Another of Rick's superiors informs him that he'll resolve this problem peacefully, introducing one of his inventions that uses stones imbued with magic and lead bullets. Without wasting time, he begins shooting several of the enemies, leaving them lying on the ground, making Rick worry about them. One of the guards threatens them, having a girl at his mercy, but Rick's reaction is to tell him not to do that if he doesn't want to die. In contrast, she thinks they're playing, acting very innocently, but when they hurt her a bit, she reacts explosively, using her devastating magic to drive them all away. One of the guards is in shock seeing her use 7th level elemental magic with just a "take that." Meanwhile, the butler, upon seeing them, immediately understands who they are, being convinced by their capabilities. Regarding her, at only 10 years old, she is a vampire prodigy in magic, the girl of the apocalypse, Eliseret Drakel. The other is half-elf and half-dwarf, and despite his appearance, he's over 50 years old. His techniques seem 1,000 years into the future. The best armorer in the world, the artisan of 1,000 years, Mizet Eldwarf. And that orc has as much physical strength as intelligence, using all existing support magic, the beastly sage, Broston Ashork. The three of them are level S adventurers, those monsters whose combat instincts defy all logic, and they are members of a group composed solely of level S, the most powerful and legendary group on the continent, Orichalcum Fist. He never thought he could see them in person, deciding to retire and live the rest of his days in peace. With that matter resolved, Rick immediately returns to Rionette, who casually throws Freed against a wall to leave him there. At that moment, a severely injured Lynx approaches Rick, telling him that Raster did all this to him, and he couldn't do anything against his power. Rick deduces that Raster did this just to become his examiner. Lynx also tells him that he comes from a poor and remote place, where many children want to be adventurers, and he wanted to build a school for them. And when Raster heard all this after asking, he mocked that a delayed commoner wanted to do something like that, and if someone like him teaches them, they will also be nobodies. Additionally, that old people like him are the ones ruining this world. As frustrating as it was, he couldn't respond, now believing that maybe it's ridiculous for someone like him to have dreams. That's why he advises Rick to withdraw from the exam, but Rick interrupts to let him know what he thinks, which is that it doesn't matter at what age one decides to do something. With nothing more to say to him, he leaves to go directly to the second test area. Meanwhile, Raster sees one of his guards arriving severely injured, understanding that Rick will indeed come to take the test, happily accepting to make him suffer so much that hell will seem like little. In contrast, Rick walks slowly towards the arena where Raster is, showing a rather different aura than usual, demonstrating a strong determination to give him a beating. For a moment, we are introduced to Adolf, who explains the 4 fundamental faculties. These are physical strength, body control, magic reserves, and magic control, and they largely determine an adventurer's strength. He can visualize the values of other people's fundamental faculties because he was born with this amazing ability. At that moment, he checks the examiner's level, which shows quite high stats, especially in magic reserves, something worthy of an A level. However, upon doing so, he starts complaining about his eyes hurting a lot. After calming down, he notices Rick at the arena's entrance and, judging by his age, decides to observe his stats. When he does, he sees that the 3 fundamental faculties, except for magic reserves, rise above the limit without stopping. This causes him so much pain that he falls to the ground and writhes uncontrollably. Now we are with Alya, who knows Rionette because she saw her with Rick earlier, finding out that she is a member of his group. Rionette invites her to watch with the others, and as she approaches the others, Mazette invites her to sit next to him, but she rejects him for being a perverted harasser. When Mazette meets Elise, he sees a rather mesmerizing cleavage, so he invites her to sit next to him, but Rionette quickly pulls her away from him. As Rick is entering the arena, Broston asks Rionette what she thinks of him, and she replies that Rick will pass the test without any problems, but Alya worries that his examiner is Mr. Raster, as he is an A-level and very demanding with the candidates. Hearing this doesn't change their opinion since they are quite confident he can overcome this. Raster tells Rick that he's surprised he managed to escape from his guard, though it's normal since they're mere commoners, and that he shouldn't think that he, a noble and a genius, is like them. At that moment, Rick asks him why he became an adventurer. He responds that it's because he has a talent for it, and even though he's a noble, being an adventurer gives him even more status. His plan is to quit when the time comes because he's tired of all this. Once he hears his reasons, Rick takes a breath to declare that he won't lose to someone like him. Raster mentions that he should respect his superiors more, and that he doesn't think he'll be able to keep talking much longer. Starting the exam, he uses first-level elemental magic, Ice Shot, shooting an ice projectile that flies past Rick and hits the wall. He looks confident, thinking Rick is paralyzed with fear, while Rick is mentally preparing not to let his anger take over, to stay calm, and be rational. This is because he's following the advice Rionette gave him before the exam, which is that when the duel starts, he should use the first minute to calm down and focus on observing his opponent. Seeing that he won't do anything, Raster continues with 3rd-level elemental magic, Flame Illuminate, causing Rick to be engulfed in a huge flame. Alya worries about this, though a few seconds later, she sees he emerged unscathed from the attack. Here, Broston comments that for Rick, something like that doesn't even count as a hit, and talks about the 4 fundamental faculties: physical strength, body control, magic reserves, and magic control. Among them, magic reserves must be developed when young, or there's no way to do it later, needing to be done before turning 20. Rick became an adventurer at 30, so his magic reserves are very low. At that moment, we are shown a flashback of when Broston trained Rick, where he told him that he could only rely on his own body and that they would start by going to the next town. What Rick doesn't understand is why he has to go with those chains and steel balls tied to his feet. Besides that, he has to go at his own pace and flee from carnivorous monsters, something that traumatized him, to say the least. So, Broston explains to Alya that to compensate for that lack, he trained a lot in the other 3 areas. While Rick keeps resisting Raster's attacks without flinching, Broston tells her that he trained him in physical strength. Mazette taught him magic control for 2 whole years, and he mentions that was because he needed good magic defense, while Alysarette says she only played with magic with Rick, which means that if he was careless with her, he would end up in pieces. On the other hand, Rionette taught him body control, and Rick overcame all the training they gave him, so his level is basically S, like theirs. Although Rick isn't aware of this, it's Broston's fault, since as he trained him, he told him that the things he did could be done by an F level, which was not true at all. Here, Raster begins to perform a combo of spells against Rick. He goes on to tell him that he's just like Lynx, commoners who deny reality and are at the mercy of someone elite like him. In the final attack, he makes 2 giant rocks crush Rick, but he just pushes them aside with brute force, unaffected. Raster starts to get annoyed by his resilience, declaring that he will finish him off with punches. He then uses Powered Punch, Quadrillion, along with Speedy Feet to 1,000, but when he charges at him, he is repelled by a simple blow from Rick. After that, Rick mentions that he now understands what Rionette said, that Raster focuses so much on being born with talent that he hasn't bothered to train it, and although he has great magic reserves, he's useless in everything else. So with an opponent like that, it's impossible to lose. Raster takes what's happened so far as luck, but warns him not to get overconfident. The next thing he does is recite a long spell combining several incantations, something he hadn't done before because he could launch attacks without reciting the spell. Here he fires 3rd-level elemental magic, Flame Eliminate, a high-speed fireball. But Rick, without moving from his spot, stops it with one hand and dissipates it, then tells him that using magic so poorly guarantees nothing. Mazette explains to Elisa that Rick used his magic with precision to block that attack and didn't use even a fraction of his opponent's energy. So someone with low reserves like Rick can shine if they are very precise. Raster still considers it luck but assures him it won't happen twice, using speedy feet to go against him and attack hand-to-hand. But Rick tells him he's too slow and counterattacks at great speed, so in reaction, Raster uses defensive magic to strengthen his body and save himself from the attack. With this, Raster begins to see that Rick is above an E level, having to admit it. He then mentions that he's tired of examining more than planned, and all that has played a bit in his favor, so he's lucky to be a commoner. Rick asks if he hates recognizing others' capabilities so much, as he didn't even use magic. It was body control, but his precision far exceeds his magic enhancement. Instead, Raster asks how someone with such low magic reserves could become so strong at his age in just 2 years. This makes Rick frown, remembering everything he went through. He couldn't leave the dragon's guard until he defeated it, had to run through explosions, swam in a monster's fluids until he almost drowned. When Elisa hears this, she mentions that if that were true, he should have died several times. Broston confirms that he did die, but his healing, applied right after death, can resurrect. They become stronger by repeatedly surpassing their limits, so Rick had to put in a lot of effort. Here we are shown the deaths he went through, where Mazette threw him off a cliff from a huge height to teach him something. But before realizing it, the fall killed him, so he asked the boss for healing. On the other hand, Alya-san threw a spell so powerful that he didn't have time to protect himself, dying instantly, and the same almost happened with Rionette. Raster calls him a liar because even if such training existed, he doesn't understand what would have driven him to follow it. Rick explains that he's like Lynx, the man Raster attacked, as his motivation is his dream, which is to defeat the world's most powerful monster, Kaiser Alsapiet. Elisa recognizes that being as the supreme monster from the Yamato legends. They confirm it, saying that's their goal as part of Orichalcum Fist. Raster mentions that the Yamato legends are just stories, so defeating Alsapiet is a childish dream. Rick, on the other hand, tells him he doesn't care if he believes in stories or not. It's not his business. After hearing this, Raster agrees, wanting to end this already, so the next thing he does is use 7th level elemental magic, Forest Rope. This causes Rick to be trapped by roots emerging from the ground, admitting that he's very good as he used that magic without chanting. Raster warns him not to relax yet, beginning to recite a long spell, boasting that there's no more powerful magic than this, 8th level elemental magic. After finishing, a giant root golem is created out of nowhere, where Raster merges with its body as its core. In response, Rick starts charging his basic magic air shot, declaring that he will pierce it with one hit. Before that, he asks Raster how many times he's used that spell, to which Raster responds that he doesn't know and mastered it after a few tries. After hearing this, Rick comments that he's used Airshot 100 million times. Elisa thinks that should be impossible, as it would be 100 million times in just 2 years. Broston explains that it's possible with the use of space-time magic, assuring her that Rick is not lying. Not wanting to waste time, Raster starts charging a magic punch, being 8th level elemental magic, Yggdrasil God Impact. When he throws the punch at Rick, he easily breaks free from the roots to counterattack with his 1st level elemental magic, Air Shot. After the impact of these devastating blows, Raster's laughter begins to diminish as he notices the golem's arm fracturing, followed by the rest of its body. Rick's pressure is so great that the golem is destroyed, and Raster is sent flying, crashing into the structure behind, rendered unconscious from the damage. At this point, Rick asks what happened, as his dream remains intact. Later, he returns to the others, who congratulate him on his success, while he thanks them for everything. Seconds later, Raster approaches with his siblings, and Rick guesses he's wondering how a genius lost to a rookie like him. He takes the opportunity to explain that he limited the number of techniques he uses and trained thoroughly, giving the advice that he should start perfecting one technique until he vomits blood. He says this as the voice of experience, expecting much from him, still considering him his superior. Raster simply tells him that in his next exam, he will re-examine him, and when that time comes, he will win. Before they leave, Angelica turns to Rick to bow an apology, then returns to Raster to help him walk. Later, they start announcing those who passed the E-level exam, where Rick patiently waits for his number to be called. Here he talks with Rionette about being nervous in his first test, and the reason was that he was remembering some things. And that's it. If you liked it, subscribe to support the channel. Comment the word perseverance to show that you stayed until the end, as not many people usually do.